So today, Albert and I are driving a Maserati Levante. That's right, I can feel the hairs on my chest growing already just being in a Maserati. And why have Maserati introduced this model? Well, for the same reason that Porsche introduced the Cayenne and all the other manufacturers have got so deep into SUVs. These are highly profitable, highly popular cars. And what Maserati are trying to do, of course, is go from a niche sports car brand to a more mainline brand, a more profitable brand, just like Porsche or any of the other brands that sell these luxury SUVs. So for that reason, I predict this will be their #1 seller in 2018, for sure. This will probably outsell all the other models that Maserati make combined. However, there may be a few roadblocks on Maserati's path to SUV domination of the market. The first one being that motoring journalists haven't been too kind to this car so far. If you look at Car and Driver, for example, they put this as the second to worst luxury SUV out of about 20 SUVs. The only SUV that's worse, the terrible Lexus GX, which is basically Toyota 4Runner in transvestite drag. And one of the main criticisms of the Levante, of course, is its price. 85 to 90,000 for this model, the S model. You're up against some very mature models within the market, namely the Porsche Cayenne S, which is very mature in this market and of course outperforms this vehicle. So a lot of people would probably go for the Cayenne, which is also a very new model within the market now. So let's consider for a moment why people buy the Maserati brand to start with. And historically it's been, partly because of the brand, but mostly because of speed, style and sound. Maseratis have always been amazing cars to listen to. They've never been terribly well built, and historically they have had some of the worst infotainment systems I have ever seen in a car. However, with this Levante, that's all changed. You've got to keep in mind that Maserati is part of the Chrysler Fiat group, and so a lot of the switchgear and the infotainment system comes directly out of Chrysler and Dodge cars, which has been a criticism of this car, but I think it's a benefit to this car, that finally there's an infotainment system that actually works in a Maserati. On top of that, this car is built unlike any Maserati I've ever driven. Like, there's no panel gaps, it's actually put together, there's no rattles, you're not having to use the engine sound to compensate for the other ugly sounds that the car makes. But I think what the critics overlook is the actual #1 reason to actually buy a Maserati, and that is something a little different. In a world that's swamped with the BMWs and Audis and Mercedes-Benz and all the other luxury SUVs, a Maserati is still something a little different. And that, to me at least, is a huge selling point. Sure, if this car becomes wildly popular, maybe not such a selling point, but right now, one of the reasons I would buy a Maserati is because it's something different. So let's get on to how does it drive. Well, it's an SUV, so it's got a higher center of gravity, and one of the marketing points that Maserati has about this car is that it's the lowest center of gravity of any SUV on the market, and that's simply not true. But it still drives and handles well, and sounds pretty decent. The 400 and change horsepower engine motivates it plenty fast enough. But what I like about it is the sound, and in most cases the gearing is perfect. Occasionally you can catch the turbocharger off the boil, but if you've got it in sport mode, that generally doesn't happen. One of the things I do like about the sport mode is that when you're cruising along, you're coming to an intersection or you're coming into a corner, as soon as you touch the brakes, starts chopping down the gears. That is super cool. And while most people would just drive it in the automatic mode, it does have a manual mode. You press the M switch, and the paddles are not stuck to the steering wheel, so they don't move. So a bit like high-end Ferraris and so forth, the paddles stay on the column, which is pretty cool. And as you chop it down, it's pretty responsive. It's kind of a fun SUV to drive. And of course those engine sounds are actually coming from the engine and the exhaust. There's no fabricated engine sounds in this vehicle. And on the outside, I don't mind the looks. Some criticism's been laid at the feet of this car that it looks a little bit like an Infiniti on the outside, but I quite like the looks. Once again, it's something different. Otherwise, as far as driving dynamics, I've got no complaints. I'm in fact pretty impressed. It is a fun car to drive. the steering's sharp, throttle response is good, brakes are reactive. It's a fun SUV to drive. And those words aren't normally used together. Yeah, Maserati's done a nice job of tuning this car to be both a comfortable SUV plus something that's pretty sporty and can be used as a little bit of a hooligan's car as well. So here we are back at my place, and I wanted to have a quick look around the interior because the interior once again has come under a little bit of criticism from other motoring journalists, and I want to give an alternative view to that as well because I like the interior. It's once again something a little different, and different is always good. And what stands out to me is the quality of the interior. Unlike other Maseratis I've been in, there's no gaps, there's no clunky bits. It is a well put together interior. And the main criticism that a lot of others have given about the interior is that some of the switchgear is straight from Chrysler Dodge cars. But really, unless you've just got out of a Dodge Chrysler car, you wouldn't notice. You know, the switchgear is actually hidden behind this beautiful wheel. You know, they're functional, but the rest of it is great. And the infotainment system, for the first time in any Maserati I've ever driven, actually works. And of course it's got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, all that sort of good stuff. Sure, some of the layout and some of the menus is a little odd, but while I've been driving it, I've had no trouble picking it up. And even the nice blue center high resolution dash here, perfectly functional, and I found my way around pretty quickly. And on top of that, the rest of the materials here in the interior are top notch. You know, the rollover here is soft leather everywhere you touch. Nice devated stitching to match the brown woodwork. Once again, it's a little different, but I like it. There's an abundance of cup holders. Under here, there's a cup holder. Oh, before we get on the cup holders, this is the key. This is the chunkiest, most industrial key I've ever felt. It's pretty cool. But yeah, there's two cup holders here and there's an ashtray down here as well, which you can pull out and turn into another cup holder. And of course, down here are some of the deepest cup holders I've ever seen. There's some oddities about the layout of the switches. There's a lot of people complain about the gear lever and how hard it is to get it into drive and reverse and so forth. But honestly, I've had no troubles with that. But for me, it's worked for me every single time. In fact, I like the layout of the gear lever. Down here are your traction controls, your manual, your sport mode and so forth. That all works beautifully as well. There's sort of an odd switch arrangement for the infotainment, but once again, I found it pretty intuitive. The outside switch does the main changes and the inside switch does the volume. Works for me. And of course, you've got the Maserati emblems everywhere. And when you're paying this sort of money, you'd expect that. One of the other advantages it's got over the Porsche Cayenne is it's a little longer, so you get a little bit more leg room in the back and a little more luggage space in the back. So my overall conclusion is that yes, you know, while I would agree that this is an expensive car for what you get, you can't overlook the fact that this is a genuinely fun SUV to drive. I predict that just like the Porsche Cayenne, this is going to be a huge seller for Maserati. Albert and I thank you guys for coming along for the ride as always, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye then.